Is homework the right thing to do? Is it the wrong thing to do? How much should I give? How much should I not give? Should I grade it? Should I not grade it? These are the questions plaguing educators daily. And today we are going to hack homework, going to hack assessment, and we're going to do it all with a star named Starr. Welcome to the Hack Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Barnes, bringing you right now solutions to some of your biggest teaching and learning problems. Now, let's hack learning. I got out my bed early this morning. Down the road I go. So those questions are plaguing educators around the world, and homework is such a hot button issue. And we are joined on the Hack Learning Podcast by teacher, author, presenter, all-around superstar in education, Starr Sackstein, author of many books, including Hacking Assessment and Hacking Homework. And that makes for a perfect combination because today we want to talk about homework, but we also want to talk about assessment. What do we do when we are assigning outside of class work? How do we assess it? And one thing that Starr Sackstein and her co-author Connie Hamilton say in Hacking Homework is that homework grades are meaningless. Starr Sackstein, welcome to the Hack Learning Podcast. Tell us a little bit about grades being meaningless with homework.
Well, as folks who know who I am probably know, I think grades in general are meaningless, but exceptionally so when it comes to homework because we just can't know who's doing it, for one. And since we have no proof necessarily of the person doing the work, we really don't know what exactly we're assessing. So when we put a number on it, or my favorite, check minus, check plus, those real meaningful kinds of pieces of data that we put sometimes. And something I learned just recently, too, from a colleague is he puts a giant check, or the size of the check on the paper indicates how well the kids know, and the kids know just by the size of the check, which was absolutely baffling to me.
So a tiny check is not good, and a medium-sized check is okay, and a big old check is really good?
So it seems. I was seriously baffled as I was listening to, because we were talking about feedback, and this was the feedback that was provided to kids, the size of the check. So I think that too often when we're giving homework, a lot of teachers don't even look at what's given. Like, we give it because we have to give it, and then when it comes back to us, we don't necessarily want kids to know that we aren't looking at it as closely at it as they've been doing it. Like, my son had a complete and total meltdown the other night over a homework assignment. And then when I asked him after school the next day, so how did it go? He's like, she didn't even look at it. And, I hear things like that and it drives me crazy. And I actually gave both of his teachers a copy of the book for the holidays.
So they are, hopefully they're hacking homework on their winter break.
I'm hoping.
Yeah, so it does seem to be one of the many problems with homework, this idea that teachers just struggle with, why am I even giving it? A lot of them don't even know how to answer. It's the idea that maybe it's a policy thing. The school says we have to assign X amount of homework a week. We have to have homework count for a certain percentage. And then it comes back in, and, if a teacher has 100 or 120, 150 students, sometimes it comes in and it's just something that gets checked off. And as you're saying, maybe it gets a gigantic check or a very small check. But it becomes something that's just to do. It's a to-do item for kids. And as with your own son and with my own children, we know that they get very frustrated by this because it's meaningless. It becomes meaningless to them. Why am I doing it if it seems meaningless and I can't attach a value to it, and then I turn it into my teacher doesn't even do anything with it? So these are the problems with homework. Starr Sackstein, tell us some of the fixes before we really talk about assessment and how we can display growth, which is what we want to discuss today. Tell us a little bit about some of the things you and Connie Hamilton wrote in Hacking Homework about changing the way we do homework?
Well, I think that we as educators sometimes forget that kids do a lot of stuff at home already that are really attached to learning, but we don't explicitly connect the things that we're doing to learning. So I think we have to just make the time that kids are using already a little bit more transparently connected and just kind of talk more and use more of what they're doing on their own time. And then if we are going to expect them to do something at home, it should be flexibly assigned, especially, looking at it from the older grades, high school. There is undoubtedly going to have some work done at home, but if we give kids a couple of weeks to complete a worthwhile assignment that is going to be a part of something bigger or has something to do with their overall learning for the marking period, then they could decide when it works for them to do the work, to do the learning. And if they have something come up, it's their grandmother's birthday, God forbid someone dies and they have to go to a funeral or get sick, there's not that additional pressure of a deadline daily that's really going to add pressure. There's a level of flexibility that honors their time and their commitment to the other things in their lives. And I think if we all communicated better and spent more time kind of honoring and respecting each other's time, I think the learning process would be a little bit more seamless, both in and out of school.
Yeah, for sure. So let me see if I understand this, and let's clarify a little bit for our listener before we get to talking about how to assess this outside of schoolwork. So what I hear is you say, instead of the nightly homework, the worksheets, the workbooks, the textbook questions, the read an article and summarize it, the kinds of things that we give to kids, or at the younger grades, the copy the spelling words over and over and over again, things like that. Instead of that, you say, let's attach our out-of-school work to something bigger, and then give our students the opportunity to decide what they're going to do or how they're going to do it or when they're going to do it to demonstrate learning around some sort of bigger activity. Is it a project? What is the bigger situation that kids are going to then go home and choose what to do to demonstrate learning? Give me an example or two.
Well, at the level I'm teaching at for let's say, high school English, my students were always engaged in both group projects as well as independent projects. And, whether they were going out and doing a passion project where they were interviewing people outside of school, or making those appointments to go interview people outside of school, that would be one small portion of the write-up they were going to have to do later, but they would have time to do in class. Or flip that, if it was better for their learning to do the interview while in class, I would let them use their phones in class to have the interview over the phone. And then if they preferred to work at home because it was quieter or however their process worked, giving them that kind of flexibility. I also always recommend, people say things about reading. Students should be reading, stuff they enjoy, not stuff that comes out of a bin in my classroom that they have to write reading logs about, because kids do like to read. It's just, what they think we want them to read that becomes problematic. So even stuff like that. Projects all have their pieces. Sometimes they need to go to the library. Sometimes maybe if they're doing a science experiment, they have to go on a nature walk and collect a bunch of things at home to bring back into class to attach to whatever project or experiment that they're working on. So those are all things that would be connected, but also fun and exploratory and engaging, and also then later connected to other things they would be doing in class.
Yeah, now, I love the sound of this, and, Starr and I go way back, and we think so much alike on so many things. So that I like this, and I'm all in favor of it. And when I was in the classroom teaching, this is what we did, large projects, and the kids went home, and then they had a variety of things that they needed to do over the course of a project. And the nice thing was they could choose. They could say, well, tonight I'm going to write this blog post, or I'm going to go do that interview like you talked about, or I'm going to go outside because there's some sort of outdoors piece to this. And they had a chance to choose. And I think that's really what we're looking for, is to get kids to drive the learning. So I get this. You get this. I think so many people in the hacking homework camp get this. But let's deal with pushback, because you know, as the author of 2 Hack Learning series books, that pushback is a really important piece, because people listen to the show, and I know a lot of them say, okay, this sounds good, but here's my issue. And that's what we do with pushback. So as the teacher who is maybe trying to make the transition, I like to think that we have a lot of listeners who, they're not just in our camp in terms of progressive-minded education, but a lot of times they might be people who are sort of making that transition. They're going, man, I'd like to try some new things. And they hear people on the show and say, okay, that sounds good. But maybe they're pushing back. So if I'm the person who's used to giving the traditional homework, I'm sending home the worksheets or the workbooks, the workbook comes back, you had to do 2 or 3 pages with 20 to 30 items, and all I got to do is check them off. Big check, little check. Or I have to assign a point value to them. Whatever it is, that's easy, Starr. I can do that, and if it's 20 questions and they're each worth 1, suddenly my life as a teacher in terms of assessment gets easy, right? Because I can just check which ones are right and wrong and translate that to a grade. But when we get into the world you're talking about, this bigger picture and giving choice and these different kinds of activities, I don't know that I can just put a check or a point value on it. How am I going to assess kids going home and choosing to do various parts of a larger project?
Okay, so I'm going to say something absolutely crazy right now.
That's not like you at all.
What if we don't have to assign a number or a check or a value to any of these things? We just have to give feedback on it, like narrative or verbal or any kind of feedback that would promote specific personalized learning to whatever the child is doing. Because if we're asking them to do something meaningful that is connected to the work that's going on in class also, then we're going to be able to see what they've done, not in our own time, but in the time that's happening in class, and really be able to tailor the kind of feedback we give to the students. Now, something more meaningful we might be able to ask them to do in this place is have them set goals. Ask them to share it with us via Google Docs so that we could provide them comments that way. Maybe even do a class Twitter chat for older kids later for extra help. Have kids start talking to each other, providing resources, curating resources together on a class hashtag. These are all things that could be going on that could be, really low-level moderation required once protocols are in place. And then as far as assessment is concerned, we're asking kids to reflect and self-assess, and they're telling us what they learned. And then when it comes time for us to give the final look over of what they've actually done and how they've done it with the evidence they've provided, we actually have a much better idea of what they're taking away from the learning. And I think that actually takes a lot of the grading, that the traditional grading out of it, because you don't necessarily have to assess every single piece as it goes through in the traditional sense. You just have to keep giving a lot of formative feedback so that the pacing of the learning is appropriate for every kid. And then at the end, based on the reflection and self-assessment the student does and the conversation you've had with the student, you have a good idea of what level of mastery they are at for whatever you're trying to assess at that time. I think by the time you get done with a 3-week period, hopefully you've spent time with every single child in your class at least a bunch of times.
Yeah, and when is that time, Starr? When is the time? Because I know that people are saying, okay, if I'm going to grade less, and I know you write that in Hacking Homework, that we're too obsessed as teachers with grading everything. So first of all, let's back off a little bit. you're suggesting that we don't grade everything, that we observe, we discuss, we provide feedback. There's iteration, and kids will get the feedback and say, okay, I have to do this. Plus, they're self-assessing. They're setting goals, you suggest. So they're saying,
yep.
Maybe I've got a checklist of items I have to do. And there's this ongoing conversation, and this sounds amazing. And I actually feel like maybe now I'm doing a little less because I don't have to grade. I don't have to put the checks or the points on. But when do these conversations occur?
Well, they're occurring all the time. They're occurring in class because hopefully if you're doing a workshop style classroom and you're only really up at the front doing directed teaching for 5 to, maximum 15 minutes a class period, and you're moving around, you're talking to kids, and feedback could happen in so many different ways. It could be you reading over the child's shoulder with your clipboard in your hand and sort of just jotting down notes and then giving them feedback about if they're on the right track or if something needs to be adjusted, if they have specific questions they need to be asking you, and then you providing them with answers. And then it just becomes essential to be intentional about the feedback that you give them and intentional about how you expect them to track that feedback. So when you have that short conversation, it's really important for each child to have a section of their notebook that they're jotting down the conversation that they had. And again, it's taking the onus of tracking the progress off the teacher and putting it back into the hands of the students so that they themselves can see the growth throughout the project. So when it comes time to reflect at the end, they have a log of the feedback they received throughout the entire process. And the feedback doesn't only have to come from the teacher, it could be coming from their peers as well.
Oh, that's great. So this conversation happens daily. It happens in the classroom where the kids are working. There's limited direct instruction. Students are working maybe independently in small groups, at computers, and you're walking around as the teacher having these conversations. And you said the thing that really struck me is that students are logging this conversation. They're keeping some sort of notes, whether that's in a notebook or in a Google Doc or somewhere where they can then use that to drive their learning. So that becomes another important piece of that independent learning. That you said we're putting the onus on them. So the kids really have to become responsible. This is it's incredible, and I know people are listening, and I think a lot of people, maybe their heads are spinning because they're going, wow, this sounds amazing. I want to create independent learners. I want my kids to take on some responsibility, less traditional homework, more choice for them, and we're going to carry on some conversations. That's great, and I've got a whole lot here from Starr Sackstein, but I'm not sure where to begin. So I'm either driving to work listening to this, or I'm listening in the evening, and I'm thinking, what could I do to launch something like this tomorrow? I want to change how I assign homework, and I want to create this amazing conversation that I hear this feedback and assessment and homework expert talking about. But what do I do first? Give us some right now tips, Starr, for creating this environment of independent learning and feedback where students sort of take on the responsibility of logging that and learning on their own.
As silly as it's going to sound, Mark, the first thing we have to do is have these conversations with our students because we take for granted that it's just the parents and the educators who have this traditional mindset. But if you're teaching high school kids, they've been going through a system now since they were 5. And this system has definitely dictated a lot of rules and protocols that they have grown accustomed to. Whether they like it or not is irrelevant. They know that this is a part of the game they have to play. So when you start having these conversations with them, when you say to them, hey, I'm not going to assign homework anymore, at least not the way you think every single day, they're going to be overjoyed. But when they realize that the way class time is often going to be spent and even the way that you're going to give them feedback is going to be different than what they're accustomed to, that's going to create pushback with the kids too at first. So it's going to take a tenacious spirit to sort of, keep reminding students that the reason that you're doing it, be real transparent. The grades themselves don't reflect learning. And this class is all about learning. We want to move what you know and can do right now to whatever goals you have set for yourself by the end of the semester and how those align with the standards you're responsible for being proficient in by the end of the year. And I could use that language with my students. I've only been at my new school now since September, and they were extraordinarily resistant in September. Extraordinarily. Mm-hmm. No one else in my school is doing this, not even close, and I have no support now. At my old school, I at least had administrative support. I don't really even have that here. And the systems that I had in place at my old school also don't exist in the school that I'm in now. So it's really taken a lot of effort to get the kids to have their feedback logs, continually remind them of why we're doing the feedback logs, what purpose they really have. And then at the end of every major assignment, which takes a lot longer because I would rather go slowly and teach through the assignment than just do lots and lots of different stuff that sort of doesn't connect. And give the kids as much choice as possible all along the way. And these conversations keep coming up, and I either give them feedback to their reflections, or we have conversations privately in class, or sometimes it grows to be a very big conversation in class. And my recommendation is, when you start doing this, don't be afraid to stop doing whatever you're doing right now and really give it the attention it needs, because kids understand what's important by what time you give it in terms of value. And if you spend a whole class period talking about this and why it matters, kids will understand the value you're placing on it. And that's really the most important place to start when you start moving away from these traditional ideas of homework and assessing.
Well, that's fantastic, and I think it is something that people can hold on to, that they can say, oh, okay, I could do this because this really is easy. That I can go in and have a conversation with my kids and say, we're going to sort of shift the way we do things, and it's going to involve you, and we're going to have some conversations, and we're going to de-emphasize the grades. What a great way to launch a new kind of classroom, to have a conversation with kids. It's so student-centered, and that's really what it should be. So, and the neat thing I heard, and I know this is another one, and we'll have to circle back another day to have this conversation, because I think there's a whole show here about you talking about, I hear you say, I'm the only one doing this. And I know that when I was teaching and I went to, different kind of out-of-class work, project-based learning, no grades classroom, for quite a while, I was the only one doing it. And that is something that we could certainly talk about. What does that feel like and how do you deal with that? And then you talk about having administrative support versus not having administrative support for such a transition, for a different kind of classroom where assessment is different, where homework is different. So I think that we're giving listeners a lot that they can do, but I think we're also creating some questions that we'll probably have to talk about, right?
Yeah, well, I imagine. I mean, that's why there are 2 whole books around this now.
That's right. Exactly. Hacking assessment, hacking homework, and maybe we'll have to come up with hacking teachers who need more support from administrators.
Yeah, right.
We may have to hack that title a little
hacking
bit.
relationships.
Yeah, right. Professional relationships.
Professional relationships,
so, yeah, outstanding. Well, Starr Sackstein, author of Hacking Assessment, co-author of Hacking Homework, along with Connie Hamilton. You can get those books at hackingassessment.com, at hackinghomework.com, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all around the world. Tell us more, Starr, about how we could connect directly with you.
The best way to reach me is always on Twitter, at Miss Sackstein. And at my EdWeek blog, Work in Progress from Education Week Teacher. And my email is the same as well, misssaxstein@gmail.com. And I welcome everybody's questions, thoughts, and ideas.
Outstanding. Well, Starr Sackstein, we will certainly have to circle back in the future because it appears that we have much to discuss around this whole transition from sort of an old school to a new school way of teaching and learning, changing how we do out-of-class learning, changing how we do assessment. There's so much there. And listeners can check out all of Starr's books and the entire Hack Learning series at hacklearningbooks.com. And also make sure when you're over on Amazon that you click onto Starr's author page and you will find a whole list of books that she has written. And more to come, right, Starr?
Yep. The next one's coming out in April with ASCD about how to teach kids to give peer feedback.
Outstanding. So we're so much about feedback, assessment, and all things right about education. Starr Sackstein, thank you for joining us on the Hack Learning podcast. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark.
As always, we continue the conversation at #HackLearning on Twitter and on the show notes page at hacklearningpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.